Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel, and we got another new tier list to go over, and that is going to be a Paldea Evolved early tier list prediction video. Now, shout out to Zapdos TCG for creating the tier list here that I will be using in today's video. We'll leave a link to it down below in the description if you all want to go try it yourself. But I did want to look at each card in the meta with this tier list, and there are a lot of really good cards coming out in Paldea Evolved. The format will be shaken up a little bit, and I did want to talk about where decks are going to lie in that Paldea Evolved format, because I do think that Paldea Evolved is going to shake things up, and I want to do a bit of an early meta prediction as to what the meta might look like, kind of talk about each deck, and kind of give my overall opinion on the deck in our Paldea Evolved format before it does come out. Just kind of an early prediction video. If y'all are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below and leave a like if you enjoyed, and let me know what you think of my tier list. So, starting things off, we got the Arceus variants here. We got Arcdura. I think Arcdura is honestly still a great deck. I think it's tier 1 going into the new format because Arcdura just doesn't really get any bad matchups with the new set. Maybe Shinpao, Shanpao could be a little difficult because they can one-shot your Dura. I'm still fine with that, though. I still think Cheyenne Pao is, like, a fine matchup for this deck. I'm more or less kind of like, Dura's still good against Lugia. Lugia's going to have a new way to play it. There's a new version of Lugia, and that's going to be big. The new version of Lugia doesn't play any answers to Dura, and I think Arcdura Umbreon can be really good against Gardevoir, too, even though Gardevoir does have some new tools and tricks up its sleeve that do make it way stronger. I still think Arcdura is just an insane deck for Paldea Evolved. I'm still very confident in this deck's performance. I still think Arcdura variants are very, very good going into Paldea Evolved. And also, like, Iono could be nice. You kind of make your Lost Zone matchup even better. Like, Iono with Lost City could be really good against Lost Box, and I think that Arcdura just stays pretty strong in the new format. Then we got Arc Pika, probably like tier 3, depending on the build. I do like Arctina with Pika in the new format. That actually does seem to be the better Arceus deck in Paldea Evolved is the Arc Pika deck. The Arctina Pika deck does seem to be the way to go in Paldea Evolved because you get to spam Iono, which can help against Lost Box, and you just max balloon them. If we're just talking like Arc Pika with like Espeon, VMAX, maybe Vulpix, it's probably just a tier 3 deck. I don't know if it does anything different than Arcdura. Like Arcdura might just be the better deck. And then we got Arctina. I think Arctina is also tier 1. I think that Arctina gets way better with Paldea Evolved, not because it gains any good matchups. It's literally just because you get access to Iono and Judge. So the whole goal of the deck now is you're spamming Judge and Iono. So you're just constantly making your opponent's hand shrink each time you play your supporters. And that's basically how Arctina is going to play now. And Arctina with Flying Pikachu does seem to be the way to go over in Japan right now. So we'll have to see where Arctina goes going forward, but I do think that Arctina is looking pretty good in Paldea Evolved. I do think that the addition of Spiritomb is also good, because now you have a bit of an easier time into Mew. Arctina's Mew matchup isn't, like, that bad right now, but if they play an Oricorio, they knock out your Tina before it evolves. Your Tina's the only attacker. You're not usually playing the Drapion in the deck, right? So, like, the Arctina, it's not like a guaranteed win against Mew, and I do think that Spiritomb and Arctina will make the matchup against Mew a little bit easier and will improve it quite a bit, because now you're also hand disrupting them with Spiritomb and putting on a ton of damage with Giratina. I think it gets a lot better, so I think Arctina's a tier 1 deck. And we start talking about Cheyenne Pao. I mean, for now, it seems to be a tier 1 deck in Japan. It does seem that Shanpao is living up to the hype over in Japan, so I definitely think this is probably a tier 1 deck. I don't know if it's maybe a tier 2 deck. It might just be a tier 2 deck, but I think off the rip, it's a tier 1 deck. It depends on what version is the best. If you're going to play with Palkia, Vulpix, Articuno, how many Kyogres are you going to play? Are you playing the Empoleon Vs, maybe? I don't know. I think Shanpao does seem to be pretty good at first glance, and its results in Japan have made it a potential tier 1 deck, so we'll have to see where this goes. I do think that Shanpao is maybe living up to the hype, not to the point where it's an S tier deck. We're not that far yet, but it is definitely looking like it is going to be a very decent tier 1 deck at best. And it might be a tier 2 deck when all things settle, because it's a good possibility Shanpao just becomes another Miraidon deck, but we'll see where that goes. Next up, we got Darkrai. I mean, we could probably put that in don't play this. Well, I don't even know if that's, like, the correct place to put Darkrai. In fact, we can probably, can I rename this? Yeah, we'll rename this. We'll just call it, like, Rogue we'll just call it the rogue tier. I don't play this seems kind of harsh because like Darkrai V-Star isn't like a deck that you just shouldn't play. It's a deck that maybe could be good. I mean, the benefit of Darkrai is it does have a good Mew and Guardy matchup potentially, and Gardevoir does, you know, spoiler alert, get a lot stronger with the new set. So, I mean, there's a good reason Darkrai could just be considered a rogue deck, but, I mean, I want to see Darkrai do well. Same thing with Dialga Magnezone. I don't know if Dialga Magnezone gets anything with the new set. I think, if anything, maybe Iono hurts the deck even more, because now Dialga Magnezone has a pretty, like, the deck is already kind of, like, not clunky, but not as consistent as every deck in the format, right? It doesn't have an engine, per se. You're just trying to get Rare Candy Magnezone as fast as possible using Rotom, and I don't know if Dialga Magnezone is actually going to be well-versed when you can get Iono'd into a bad hand, and then if you get Iono'd into an unplayable hand, then you probably lose. So I feel like Dialga's already pretty weak against Judge, and now with Iono in the format, it might get even worse. Iono will help the deck early on. Like, you can Rotom and then get Iono'd into a Rare Candy Magnezone, but in the later half of the game, Iono could be a little more devastating. But I don't know. The deck, I don't know if it really gains any good or bad matchups, but we'll have to see where it goes. Then we got the Flamigo set. Obviously, it's a rogue deck. If this deck would ever be good, Sableye would have to rotate out of the format first, but I do want to see Flamigo perform well. And then we got Guardy. I think, honestly, both Mewtwo, Guardy, and Gardevoir are now going to be in the S tier. Now, the reasoning behind this is Gardevoir just gets a plethora of new cards to work with. Now, the reason I'm actually putting Guardy Mewtwo in S tier, it's not because Guardy Mewtwo is, like, all of a sudden really good. We're talking, like, this is a different way to play Gardevoir Mewtwo. It's not the Gardevoir Mewtwo deck we're used to. It's a completely different deck, basically. So we'll talk about that in a sec, but the normal Guardy deck obviously gets way better. You get Super Rod. Reversal Energy is so good for the deck because now Chilling Reign, Shining Arcana Gardevoir can do even more damage without needing as much, like, energy preemptively on it. So Reversal Energy is a humongous upgrade to Gardevoir, almost to the point where Gardevoir is going to be super deadly. Obviously, there's the whole, like, Drifloon, Charm, Champions Festival combo that people are hyping up. So Gardevoir does seem to now potentially be an S tier deck. It might actually be time for Gardevoir to be a relevant meta deck. I also think Iono just makes Gardevoir even better against Lost Box. Like, Gardevoir's main crutch right now is it doesn't have the best Lost Box matchup. You're relying on Roxanne, you're relying on early game Judges, but Lost Box doesn't really get bodied by that a lot of the time, right? So the Lost Box matchup is bad, but now that Guardy gets to play Iono, it's going to have an even easier time against Lost Box. I think Iono is going to make Gardevoir even stronger. And then you have the Mewtwo Guardy deck. Now, Mewtwo Guardy is not the same, you know, Klefki Guardy deck that just plays Mewtwo and everything else. It's actually a completely different take on Gardevoir. The deck in Japan, the Mewtwo Guardy deck in Japan, seems to be a bit more of a checkmate style deck where you're trying to fall behind on prizes with Reversal Energy, Luxray. You play the Gallades, you play both Gallades, and it's basically just like a deck that tries to constantly take advantage of Reversal Energy and always stay behind in the prize trade until you can win the game with Mewtwo V Union. So you're never actually in the Guardian Mewtwo deck plays like a deck that doesn't go ahead in prizes, so you basically stay behind in prizes the entire game, use Reversal Energy as much as you can, and then you set up either, you just set up Mewtwo V Union, and you either win with Final Burn, or you win the game with Psy-Splosion because you set up a bunch of damage through Reversal Energy. And that's the new way to play Gardevoir EX in our new format. And I do think the deck is legit. It's doing pretty well in Japan, and I think that it's a very cool deck. It's a bit more of definitely a bit more of a skill-intensive deck, but Guardy Mewtwo is not, Guardy Mewtwo Klefki anymore. It's now Guardy Reversal Energy Checkmate Mewtwo box. So it's not the exact, you're not trying to get Mewtwo in play right away. You're saving Mewtwo when you win the game. You're using Mewtwo on the turn you win the game. And that's basically what the new Guardy Mewtwo deck does. And right now, it does seem to be a very good deck in Japan. I think both Guardy decks in Japan is just so good. I think Gardevoir just gets such a huge upgrade with Paldea Evolved. It's just mental. Reversal Energy just gives Gardevoir so much room to just basically be so good. And Iono, too. Iono, Reversal, and Super Rod are just fantastic upgrades to the deck. Next up is Lawson Gudra. I mean, I guess we'll call that a tier 2 deck. Lost Gudra doesn't really, I don't know if the needle really moves with it. I mean, it doesn't really gain any good matchups, to be honest. Actually, you know what? Honestly, Lost Goo might be a tier 3 deck. I'm thinking about it now. I think the issue with Lost Gudra is it actually, if anything, gets worse because Gardevoir can easily one-hit KO it with the Reversal Energy Shining Arcana Gardevoir. You also have to deal with Xianpao, which can just easily deal with a Gudra. Duraludon isn't going anywhere, obviously. Yeah, I think Gudra might just be a tier 3 deck. It might even be a rogue deck. Like, the deck actually might just be that bad. I don't know, man. Argu is probably another, like, I mean, there's room for Argu. So Argu can play Vulpix V-Star, which Vulpix V-Star does seem to be good because Vulpix is really good against Guardy and Xianpao. So maybe Argu's like tier 3. I'll call it tier 3. There's actually been a few Argudra decks in Japan that have performed well recently, and they do play the 1/1 Vulpix V-Star because Vulpix V-Star is very good against Xianpao and Gardevoir, except for Guardy Mewtwo, but Vulpix V-Star is pretty good against Guardy and Xianpao. Xianpao is another deck that just most of its attackers just have abilities, so Argu could actually be a legit deck. I don't know about Losku. I feel like Losku just doesn't have what it takes anymore because I just feel like it gets worse because it just gets more bad matchups and then good matchups with Paldea Evolved. Honestly, Losku just might be a rogue deck. I'm like, the more I think about it, the more I just don't like Losku. I mean, I guess Losku gets to play Iono, which does help it a little bit. The fact that Losku gets to play Iono is actually a pretty big deal, but I feel like Losku just is no longer that good because I feel like with Dura, Gardevoir getting reversal energy and Xianpao becoming a thing, I don't know if I feel like Argu would just be better at that point. And then Kyurem obviously is a rogue deck. I mean, it's a fun rogue deck, but again, the Kyurem deck doesn't gain anything. I mean, I guess it does gain Xianpao, which could be a cool one-of to play. I guess Xianpao, Kyurem, and Baxcalibur you could play with Kyurem. So we'll call it a rogue deck, obviously. I don't think Kyurem's ever gonna like be anything than a rogue deck. And then we got Lost Box. Now, doesn't look like he put like the Sky Seal and like Force Seal on here, but we're assuming that this is like Turbo Lost Box, which is still probably like, I don't even know if I would call Lost Box S tier. I guess we have to. Like in Japan right now, Lost Box is still doing really well. Despite Lost Box does get a little bit worse. I think the big deal with Lost Box is it does get Super Rod back. And Super Rod is a fantastic card for Lost Box. In fact, Super Rod makes Lost Box even stronger. However, Lost Box also gets Iono in the format, and Iono is going to be very good against Lost Box. The thing with Iono is that every time Lost Box advances, you know, in the prize trade, Iono becomes stronger. The other thing with Lost Box, too, the one thing you got to keep in mind with Lost Box is always building up a big hand full of good cards. You're never going to see Lost Box Lost Zone away good cards, like unless they absolutely have to. You're never going to see them keep the bad cards. They're always lost in away bad cards that they don't need in a situation, or they're always going to take the theoretical good card for a situation to be in. This is where Iono is going to be good. Their hand is going to be full of good cards that they need, and then you're going to Iono them. Those cards are all going to go to the bottom of the deck, and then they're going to get more cards that are going to be a mix of bad and good, and then they're kind of back to square one. And again, every time you take multi-prizes, if you ever have a turn where Sableye gets 2 prizes, or Greninja takes a knockout, you're getting Iono'd even into a smaller hand each time, and Iono can be very devastating for Lost Box, and I think Iono is maybe what we need to keep Lost Box in check, because Lost Box, in my opinion, in our current format, is one of the worst things to happen to the trading card game. I think Lost Box is... I've been on rants before about this, but I hate Lost Box. I think Lost Box has done more damage to the game than most decks have in a long while. And I am glad that Lost Box finally has, like, a soft check now with Iono. It's not going to be the best... I mean, I'm not saying Iono is going to beat Lost Box every time. I'm just saying Iono makes you feel a little bit safer when playing against Lost Box now, because Lost Box did need some kind of counter, which it's not a complete counter, but it isn't a bad... It's better than, you know, judging and praying, right? It's actually a pretty good way to kind of hopefully stop them. So hopefully Iono puts Lost Box down to, like, tier 1 maybe, because I'm sick of Lost Box. I hate this deck. I think Lost Box has done more damage to the game than good, but we'll have to see where Lost Box goes. I think at the start of the format, though, it does seem to be an S tier deck. It's still doing well in Japan. I think the Kyogre build can also still shine, because Kyogre can still play around Iono to, like, a bad hand, so they can still, like, use Iono to get 4 cards, but, you know, Kyogre can still make the Iono go to 4 cards instead of going to 2 or 3 like with Roxanne. So the Kyogre build still could be good, but I think in general Lost Box might finally have some kind of decent-ish counter with Iono. Next up is Lost Tina. I'm going to put it in tier 1. I mean, right now in Japan, Lost Tina is actually a very good deck. In fact, it might even be S tier in Japan. But the problem is the translation from Japan to America with Tina has been abysmal. I mean, Lost Tina is like basically a meme at this point. It's a deck that nobody respects and puts any thought into. It does do okay in online tourneys, but it doesn't have the regionals to back it up. And this deck was like BDIF S tier in Japan when Scarlet and Violet first happened in Japan, and then all of a sudden it comes over to our side of the board and Giratina like completely flops. And I think the reason for that is maybe Lost Box is just better, but I do think that Lost Tina is still decent. In fact, it is arguable that Lost Tina is better against Iono than the straight Lost Box deck, which is a pretty big deal. So that is one of the many benefits of Lost Tina is a bit better against Iono than most decks in the format. So it's a good reason actually to put Tina in tier 1. Again, I don't know if this deck will translate well into our side of the game, because again, it seems like Japan just likes Lost Tina and we don't like it. But if history repeats itself and Lost Tina once again flops over here, then, I got no hope for it, man. But I do think it's tier 1 for the moment, just because it's so good in Japan, but because nobody cares for it, I don't know if it'll ever be S tier. Then we got Sableye Cramsard, probably a tier 2 deck. This is another deck that does get hurt pretty hard by Iono. This deck could maybe be tier 1 in a better meta, but I think Iono makes Sableye Cramsard a little bit worse, because Iono will do more damage to this deck. So yeah, it feels like this deck is a bit weaker to Iono, because your attackers are very linear, as opposed to, at least Lost Box, you have, a lot of different attackers, and, you can use Snorlax, Articuno, Dragonite, Raikou, whatever, and Kyogre, but Sableye Cramsard, you're very linear with what you're doing, and, like, sometimes when you get Iono'd, you can't do the Charizard, you're not really trying to cram or Sableye that turn, and that's where Sableye Cramsard becomes a little bit worse. Then we got to talk about the Lugia build. So I think Lugia Snorlax and Single Strike Lugia are both still up there. So I think the Snorlax build of Lugia is tier 1. I'm not sold on this deck yet. I do agree that this deck does seem to be decent. I think Snorlax as a main attacker is actually pretty insane. Snorlax is a very good card, in my opinion, in the format. And having access to, like, Weird Ear, and just being more like a straight colorless box deck is a little bit stronger than, what it might look like. However, I still think Single Strike Lugia is just better, because Single Strike just gives you more options. You got the Duraludon build, you have the Urshifu, you have the Tyranitar. Tyranitar is still going to be good. I think Tyranitar Iono against Lost Box is pretty nasty. I also think T-Tar is going to be necessary going up against Gardevoir variants. And Yveltal is obviously going to be important too. I still think Single Strike Lugia is the better build of the Lugia decks, but I think that Lugia will still be very strong. I mean, it's Lugia. Lugia also gets Iono, so Lugia no longer has to play Judge as a draw supporter. Now that it has Iono, it gets a little bit stronger, because in the early game, Lugia can play Iono as an extra draw supporter that, instead of having to Lumineon for research or Burnett, you can use Iono, and sometimes Iono gets you, like, Archeops. I just think Iono is just a really big upgrade to Lugia in general, and I think that Lugia gets better because of Iono, because it just now has another good draw supporter to play, apart from research. Because all it has is, like, Burnett, research, and, like, Judge, but I think that Iono is a pretty cool upgrade to Lugia. But yeah, and the other problem with the Snorlax build doesn't really seem to have a way to deal with Duraludon, which is a problem. I do agree, though, that the Snorlax build does have a lot more options. It does have the Weird Ear. It's got the Snorlax. The Snorlax is, again, a really strong attacker. So we'll have to see where the Lugia Snorlax deck goes. For now, it might be tier 1, because it does have good results in Japan. And then Single Strike, I still think will be tier S, because I still think Single Strike Lugia beats Gardevoir. And if you're beating Gardevoir, that's pretty good. Next up is Meowscarada variants, probably going to be tier 3. Meowscarada does seem like a really cool deck, and I think that the Lost Zone build is probably going to be the best way to play it, because you get Sableye, and Sableye is just a bananas card with Meowscarada's ability, where you're putting 3 damage on the bench. So I'm definitely going to hold out high hopes for Meowscarada. I can't put in Rogue. I'll put it in tier 3, because even then, it's still got some results in Japan, so I can't respectively put in Rogue. It is an interesting archetype, though, for sure. Next up, we got Mew. I think both builds of Mew are tier 2. Mew just gets a bit worse because Spiritomb comes out, and Spiritomb is going to make Mew a lot worse. Obviously, Fusion Mew could be the better of the two now, because you can put Fusion Energy onto Genesect V, and you can use Fusion Energy on Genesect and actually get around Spiritomb's ability. Because Spiritomb, obviously, if it's in play, it shuts off all basic V's abilities. So if you just put a Spiritomb in play, Genesect's ability doesn't work. It's really kind of just bananas. So Mew does get a lot weaker because of Spiritomb. I don't know if it's ever going to be tier 1 or S tier again, because I think Spiritomb is just really good against it. It's kind of unfair how good it is, but I mean, it is nice that they like keeping Mew in check, though I don't know why they can't just do a Lost Box. it is what it is. Mew definitely is probably just a tier 2 deck now. I think that Spiritomb just does too much damage to Mew for it to be any higher. But I could be wrong, though. I could be wrong. Mew could be just a better deck. But it just being able to just throw Spiritomb down and, like, even if Spiritomb ever gets KO'd, it's like, even if it buys you a few turns of getting ahead of your opponent, it's like, it's just that good of a card. Miraidon, it's probably tier 3. Yeah, I guess Miraidon's tier 3. I don't know. It's actually maybe a tier 2 deck. Miraidon's still good against Lugia, and it's actually decent against Arceus decks. I don't know. Miraidon's kind of a weird deck. I don't really think it does much with the new format. I guess Miraidon has a better Xianpao matchup than most decks because you just trade evenly against them, and if you get the turn 1 donk, you're just probably chilling, because they'll have Palkia, but Palkia's weak to lightning. Xianpao gets one-shot by Miraidon, and maybe even Raikou, so... I mean, I don't know, man. Miraidon could be a tier 2 deck, actually. I don't know. And it still has, like, answers. It actually gets Iono, too, which is another, decent upgrade. It gets Iono, and it gets the Cape of Toughness reprint that gives it the plus 50 HP, which is honestly kind of good. I mean, Miraidon having 270 HP can actually be pretty deadly in a lot of matchups. Like, against Snorlax Lugia, if you just go, like... I forget what the card's called. You just put the Cape of Toughness on the Miraidon, 270 HP, and all of a sudden Lugia can't knock you out as easily, and that's the weirder you, which could be awkward. So I really think that Miraidon might legit be a bit better in this format, because I think it has a fine matchup against Lugia. I think it has a pretty good arc matchup. If you're able to just one-shot RC, like being able to donk an Arceus V before they set up is pretty deadly, and you still have like decent, with Regieleki, you can trade pretty well into Dura. Iono could be a really cool upgrade to the deck, so then your Lost Box matchup gets a little bit better, and you just have more draw in the deck as opposed to just playing Research, Arven, and Serena, so your draw is a little bit better with Iono in the early game. I think Miraidon could be finally a decent deck. I don't know, we'll have to see. I'll put it in tier 2 for now. Could be wrong, could be a tier 3 deck, and maybe it is a tier 3 deck, but I'm sipping on that Miraidon Hopium. Then we got to talk about, I guess, Noivern? That's probably a rogue deck. I don't know if Noivern is going to be its own deck, to be honest. I don't know if Noivern can be its own deck. Because the problem with Noivern, against Lost Box, Noivern doesn't one-shot Cramorant, and it also doesn't one-shot Sableye without playing Cleansing Gloves. I'm not sold on Noivern. I don't know if Noivern can work by itself. If we're talking Regidrago, I could put Regidrago in tier 3. Because I think Noivern is a decent upgrade to Regidrago. I also think Fortress Regidrago is a pretty good deck. Arc Drago is another deck that some people have been playing in Japan, so... I don't know about Noivern. If that was Regidrago, I would probably put that in tier 3. Next up is Oinkologne, probably another rogue deck. I mean, this deck started off pretty strong in Japan, but just kind of flopped over here. And I think the reason why Oinkologne flopped was because I just think that it's just not able to compete with Lost Box. Gardevoir's another pretty awkward matchup. The deck is cool, and maybe the deck gets better with Iono, because you got Iono Path, which can be a little bit deadlier. So maybe Oinkologne will finally get a little bit stronger with the format, because I think Iono plus Path is a good combo, but we'll see where Oinkologne goes. I want the deck to do good. I mean, it's a cool deck, but it's kind of gatekept by just how good Lost Box is. And I think Xianpao is another bad matchup. Xianpao just kind of bodies you too, I guess. Palkia, probably a tier 3 deck. Palkia right now is getting day 2 in regionals, and there's a bit of hype online for it, and it's another deck that does have some new cards. I mean, you could play Xianpao as like a way to get energy out of your deck. And I've actually seen in Japan, I think in my video where I looked at early lists from Japan, here on the second channel, we did look at a few Palkia lists that weren't Baxcalibur. It was just Palkia by itself with like Xianpao as kind of a way to get you bucket back. So it's a really cool idea. And I think like Xianpao Palkia without Baxcalibur is like a decent archetype. Palkia is another card that like, it's not too bad. I mean, it does a lot of damage. It's, it's still good. I mean, it's still a very opposing threat. Star Portal with Greninja is still a really good combo. So we'll have to see where Palkia goes. I think it's definitely maybe a tier 3 deck for the time being. Control's maybe tier 3. You could call it a good deck, but like there's only a few control players, and like Sander is one of them, and I'm sure Sander is going to do some wild things with control at NEIC without a doubt. But I'm not sold on control. It does gain a few decent cards, I think, with the new format, and I think we looked at a couple control decks in that Paldea Evolved video. We'll have to see where control goes. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to judge where control is. I'm sure Sander would call it S tier, but as somebody who doesn't really play control max, I can't put it higher than tier 3. Quaquaval is another rogue deck. It's a cool rogue deck, but I don't know if Quaquaval is that good. It's a cool rogue idea, though, and I can't wait to do a video on it. Regis, probably going to be rogue. I want Regis to be back. Honestly, man, I love Regis. Regis is my all-time favorite Scarlet and Violet deck. It's my all-time favorite Sword and Shield era deck, I meant to say. I want Regis to be good. Regis does gain a few new cards. I think the first card that it gains is the new Luminous Energy, which is a decent upgrade to it. It also gets Iono, which is a great supporter to play. It's like almost playing, Marnie Research again. You can still abuse Path. The only issue I have with Regis is that Lost Box matchup is still up in the air because you don't have Scuba Net anymore. Scuba Net rotating is a huge deal because now Lost Box can use Kyogre against you a lot more easier. They have Sableye, which you have no way to Scuba Net your stuff. I guess you could play a Penny or you play Force Switch card, but I don't even know if that's going to save Regis. So if Regis has a way to beat Lost Box consistently, I would maybe call it a tier 2 deck because I think Regis could come back. I mean, you have a lot of types. Regirock is pretty good. Registeel, Regice aren't terrible either. Gigas is okay. I don't know, man. I think Regis could come back. And the ability to get a turn 1 knockout still or a turn 1 attack is still also really good. It's one of the things that makes Regis such a good deck is that it was one of the only decks that could attack and get a knockout on the first turn of the game. And on your first turn anyways, going second. And I think Regis still can do that with the new sets. I don't know. I'm hoping for Regis to come back. I love Regis. I would love to see it come back. For now, I'm going to call it a rogue deck, but I want Regis to come back so badly. Shadow Rider, probably a rogue deck. I mean, doesn't gain much, I don't think. I don't know if it gets any good or bad matchups, at all. Next up is Skeledirge, obviously another rogue deck. We got Snorlax Stall, another tier 3 deck. It's another deck that, can win games. Snorlax Stall is still, not the worst deck ever, but I definitely think that it's probably just, mid. But it could be better with the new set. There are a few new cards. I do think that the new Cape of Toughness reprint card is good for the deck because now your Snorlax is even beefier. So yeah, I could see Snorlax Control doing something. It's a deck that 1 or 2 people will play to a tournament, maybe make day 2 with, but it's not a deck we're ever probably going to see win a tournament. I don't know if Snorlax or Control can win any IC unless it's piloted by Sander, of course. Tinglu's probably tier 2 for now. Its performance in Japan has been a little shaky, but I am still kind of riding the Tinglu Hopium. So it's either tier 2 or tier 3. Still, honestly, it's not even a bad deck. We'll have to see where it goes, but I'll call Tinglu a tier 2 deck for now. It seems like Tinglu could just be all hype, but we'll see. We'll see what happens when Paldea comes out, but Tinglu does seem okay, and its matchup against, Mew and Lost Box could be kind of decent, so I don't know. I'm hoping Tinglu's good. I want a deck like Tinglu to be good, so we'll have to see where Tinglu goes after, with Paldea Evolved. Then we got Rapid Strike, another deck that I think is tier 2. Rapid Strike actually does gain a couple good advantages. One, it gets Iono, so you now have a decent draw engine. You still have a good matchup against Lost Box. Your Guardian matchup is also not terrible either. You get access to Drapion, so you can still beat Mew. I don't know. Rapid Strike doesn't seem to be a bad deck going into the Paldea Evolved format. It's just a deck that you can play and do well with against Lost Box. It seems still could be a tier 2 deck at best. I don't know. We'll see where it goes, but I mean, against maybe even Max Caliber, you can knock out the Frigibaxes with Rapid Flow turn 2. I don't know. This deck could still be okay. I think Rapid Strike could still push the needle a little bit and still keep up with some of the top decks. I guess Fortress Box. I mean, maybe tier 3. I've tested Fortress a little bit IRL. It's actually kind of cool. Being able to turn 2 Iono the opponent, or if your opponent goes first and they knock out a 1-prizer and then you can Rock Sand them turn 2, it's kind of insane actually. Fortress Box seems cool. I think Fortress Regidrago might be better, but Fortress Box itself is honestly kind of a cool idea too. So we'll see where it goes. I'll put it in tier 3 for now because it can abuse Iono, and abusing Iono is pretty good, and we'll see where it goes. Then we got to talk about Zoroark V-Star. Probably a rogue deck. I mean, can you really call Zoroark a better deck than Fortress Box or Meowscarada, Lost Box? I don't know, man. I'm not sold on Zoroark right now. Maybe it's better than expected, but I don't really think it gains anything with the new set either. I don't know if Zoroark gets any new cards that make it better than it already is. So I don't know. I guess Iono could be good. Again, just Iono could just be good for the deck, right? Just enough to maybe get over the edge against Lost Box, which is one of Zoroark's harder matchups, right? So we'll see where it goes. Zoroark could still be okay. I mean, being able to KO the opponent, on the second turn for 1 billion damage is sick. It also has 1-hit KO potential, which is good. So who knows? Maybe Zoroark is better than expected. So I guess for now we'll call it a rogue deck. This is, I guess, the tier list for Paldea Evolved. I think I'm pretty accurate. I don't know. There could be a few misses. Maybe Xianpao might slide down to tier 2 after a while. Rapid Strike and Tinglu might not be tier 2. Mew could be higher than tier 2. I don't know, man. I think this is a decent, accurate tier list. Maybe some decks in Rogue might actually bump up a tier. Like, we'll see. I think a few decks in the Rogue category might go up a few tiers. Maybe Gudra's better than Rogue. I don't know. I can't see Gudra. I can't see Gudra doing well in this format. I just think that Guardy and Lugia and Duraludon and Chiem Power are just too good against it. So I don't think Gudra's that good, but maybe I'm misjudging it by putting in Rogue. I don't know. We'll have to see where it goes. Let's see Paldea Evolved tier list. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think of my opinion of the tier list down below. Did I miss anything? Is anything maybe out of order? I don't know. Let me know. I still think that Guardy is easily tier S. Maybe even Guardy might just be BDIF. The Mewtwo Checkmate Reversal Energy box deck is also pretty good. Lost Box will probably still be tier S for now, but I think if Iono does enough damage to it, then Lost Box could definitely slide down to like tier 1 or something. And I think Single Strike Lugia is still the better build of Lugia, but the Snorlax build might make some waves. And if Snorlax Lugia does better than Single Strike Lugia, then maybe Snorlax Lugia goes up into S tier. And yeah, I think Arc Pile decks are still really good because it's just, it can adapt to the format, right? I think Arc Dur is still pretty decent too. So we'll have to see. We'll see where things go. But yeah, that'll be for me. If you enjoyed, leave a like. If you're new to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below as always. And I'll catch you all in another video. And I'll be in Milwaukee this weekend. So this is probably going up like after or on the day of day 1 at Milwaukee. So I don't know. Hope to see some of y'all in Milwaukee. Anyways, peace out.